So welcome over to the podcast. It's good to connect. To give a bit of context for other people listening, we met through the Mental Health Blog Awards recently. And for all of my audience, they kind of already know that I've got this rule that is collaboration, not competition. So when I see another coach or another person in that same space, I'm always like, right, what can I learn from this person? Or how can I work with this person rather than, unless, of course, they've got a million more likes than me on social media, at which point I'm like, yeah, first. And then once the jealousy subsides, because I'm working through my own jealousy issues these days. But when the jealousy subsides, then I'm like, how can I work with this person? So that's kind of how we come to know each other. So it's good to have another coach on, because as I've said to the community already this morning, what I love finding the overlaps and the similarities, but I actually love finding the differences. And because I think there's always, it's fun. There's a lot to possibly learn there. And sometimes someone else will see something completely different to you. And then as coaches, our job is to be good at explaining things. So when you're talking to another coach, chances are they're going to be good at explaining that. And so that's always quite fun. So start off with, how did you get into coaching in the first place?
Oh, long version or short version?
Long version, please.
The long version.
I'm comfy. I've got drinks.
Good.
It's fine.
Yeah, me too. Branded, of course. I became a coach. So I have served for 13 and a half years now in the NHS as a mental health nurse. I'm a clinical specialist nurse now, but I embarked on a career within mental health within the NHS because of being in a very dark place myself. In my 20s, I hit crisis and I planned my own suicide. And if it wasn't for the support that I embarked on then, I wouldn't be where I am today. Mm-hmm. And it was those individuals who gave me the support and the time and the encouragement and the inspiration that led me to want to do the same and give back. And it purely comes from a place of personal experience. Yeah. I embarked on my own coaching journey. I've always had the qualification of part of my career path through mental health services. It's something that's very much encouraged because the work that we do is always mentor coaching focus when working with clients on treatment plans. And so it's always handy to have that under your belt. A bit of education never hurts anyone. Yeah. And just before the pandemic hit, I decided that I wanted to do something different. I noticed that there was a gap in the community where I live in Hampshire, and services, obviously, because of the pandemic, were being really stretched. And I felt like I was sat on a gold mine and a wealth of knowledge that I felt everyone needed to have a snippet of, just as I was given back then. Yeah. And so I decided to reduce my hours in the NHS, set up Beautiful Minds Coaching, and it is rocketed somewhere where I never expected it to go so quickly, to the point where I'm now part-time in the NHS, have reduced my hours more, and have started to notice a change in our community and people reaching out and supporting other people when they've gone through a journey of therapy or counsel for their own needs. They're now embarking on supporting others. And it's just beautiful to see that people who have been in a very dark place and have experienced those pockets of challenge really find power and inspiration and empowerment in not only doing the hard work themselves, but then supporting others. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on it getting to the point of you being able to...
That is a short version.
I'm
happy for questions too. I'm very much an open book. I don't hide anything. Through my social media, people will see that I literally share very raw. Yeah. So if anyone does have any questions, I'm more than happy to be asked. Amazing.
So with being in that field for kind of the length of time that you have, again, most people when you speak to, and I cringe at the phrase, but occasionally use it for myself sometimes, influencer. Most people in that kind of social media, mental health advocacy space and stuff, they've, it's pretty much always from a personal journey. And a lot of people have been in it for sort of 2 or 3 years, 4 or 5 years at most. How have things changed over the course of that time?
Hugely. I think it comes in two avenues. I think there is a huge amount of positivity out there through social media in the kind of mental health and mindset focused arena. There are some people who have done some extremely incredible work, and we're talking high profile people, let alone kind of our local lower level influencers.
Yeah.
People like Brené Brown and Vex King and Kirsty Gallagher, who mainly focuses on kind of lunar living, but the mental health and awareness side of lunar living. But I think from an influencer, and I too hate that word, I would prefer it if it was kind of more the inspirational focus rather than the influencing focus. But if you are, and I guess this comes from personal experience, but if you are a person who is willing to share and you are willing to be completely honest with your reality in your own life, and you're willing to share that on social media, I think there is a lot of power in other people being encouraged and feeling that it's okay to do the same.
Yeah.
And I think we would hammer down those social boundaries if that was done with more authenticity and integrity. I think the other side of it is there is a lot of fakery. And social media has, as well as positive, negative side effects. There are, unfortunately, in our kind of coaching, mental health, mentor world, a lot of fake people out there who have this high profile on social media to kind of gain those people's commitment and want to do better. But when you actually drill down, there's no accreditation, there's no qualification. There are people who have lived a personal journey, and I don't take that away from them, but they remove that personability of the reason why you actually go to be a coach, and they actually give the good ones like us a bad name, which is sad.
Yeah. I was going to say I've come across that more than a handful of times. It's like, obviously, it was only came up the other day because Twitch basically, up until about a week and a half ago, there was a preset list of tags that you could use for your stream, and mental health was one of them. But they decided to get to up the amount of tags you could use, but abolish the prefab list and let anyone write whatever tag they want as long as it's not got like profanity or special characters and such in it. So, and one of my moderators was like, "Why have you put the phrase life coach in there?" Because people think, first of all, no one really knows what a mindset coach is. It's not a hugely common term, and I actually chose that term for myself like 5 years ago because I didn't want to be a life coach. But ultimately, it's what are people searching for? And it's so I said to this person, I was like, look, if a person's searching for a life coach, they're going to find me, and it's going to be better. So I said, it's not that I identify as a life coach. It's like I identify as something else beyond that. But I've had charities not want to work with me and stuff because they don't like coaches. They don't like and it's not that they don't like coaches. It's that they've come across some dodgy ones, and it's been one of those things that like people are there to kind of try and watching what's the word I'm looking for, prove your chops basically, but it depends on from individual to individual what they want. Some people want that social proof, other people want you to show off all your certificates, other people want you to have a certain level of qualification, and it's none of those things individually make a person a good coach. And it's like, for example, I'm not as trained in psychology as I'm not formally trained in psychology. I'm trained in sort of personal development and that side of things. I'm originally from a personal training background, but I found that the life experience side of it helped me to help a lot of people with the mental health stuff, and then all the things that I've worked through. And I now work for the NHS as well. My story is almost the opposite of yours, is the fact that I spent years of doing the coaching thing. Then the NHS caught a whiff of the fact that I was quite good in the school talks I was doing for them, which I was doing for them for free at that time. And then they were like, what he's saying is really good, and we want to turn it into a course. So it's like, so I had a day yesterday where I was training 4 psychologists on stuff, and I'm like, look, this might seem really rudimentary based on what you've been shown in university, because it's not from the same psychological background, but it's been proven to be really, really useful. And it's it's that whole thing of like, what qualification do you want? Do you want the years of experience? Do you want the certificate? So I'll say, I'll be honest with people. I'll be like, look, if you want a psychology degree, I don't have one. It's like my degree's in nutrition. It's like, but
I can tell you what to eat.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Although, I didn't do the diploma part of it to be a certified nutritionist. And there was a funny thing there when I was a PT, is the fact that every PT gives people meal plans, even though they're not supposed to. And then I started doing that qualification. And then I had to sign a thing with the British Academy of Nutritional Therapists to say I will not give anybody diet advice for fear of having my license, which I don't even have yet, revoked before I even get it. So suddenly I was like the PT and I played by that rule. So I was the only PT in our gym that refused to give people diet advice, and it was weird because even though I'd already got 2 diplomas in nutrition by this point, and I was more qualified than any of the other people in the room to give nutrition advice. But the rules said that I couldn't. So even though the same rules said that they couldn't, there was no threat. Anyway, I'm not going to go on tangents about me anymore. That's the last one, and because I do this, it's terrible. So in terms of like, what are some of the most common things that people actually know? Before we go on to that, what are the difference, because you've worked within the confines of the NHS and then you've worked independently, what are kind of some of the benefits that you get from having that kind of independent practice that you may be unable to do from being within the NHS?
So I have my own professional NHS opinion, and I've got the Hannah private opinion. And I mean, lots has changed over the last couple of years, and we're all really aware of that. Unfortunately, in the NHS, the types of therapies or counselling that is offered is a one-size-fits-all box, and if you don't fit within that box, or you embark on the journey that they offer you and it doesn't suit, they actually don't know where to send you because there is no other pathway. And I think that's why I came to the conclusion that I wanted to do something myself, because I have experienced those platforms and I know what there is to offer. I also, as a clinician, work in the arena where it is offered and recognise that it isn't a one-size-fits-all capsule. At the same time, you lose the personability because you're put in a group of strangers, effectively, in a room who may not have any relevance to the topics that you're struggling with, but you're all expected to do the same type of self-development work.
Yeah.
Someone in the room might trigger you, and that isn't taken into account. People might be sharing things that are just too raw for you to hear when you're struggling with your own circumstances. And there is no awareness, unfortunately. It is this is all we have to offer, so that's what you're getting.
Yeah.
I think in the kind of private world is that you have the ability to mold that. You can take every client firsthand, listen, understand what their struggles are, and start to really break down your resources to fit their need. And then when you move on to the next client, you do exactly the same, and you might take a few from the previous client because actually they would work quite well, but actually the other things that you used have to be molded, and words have to be changed, and the context of discussion has to be changed, and imagery has to be changed, and everybody deserves the opportunity to have something that is molded to them because they're an individual, and mental health is not a one-size-fits-all box.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the kind of more common, and again, I don't ever want you to have to like out a specific client because I understand that's grim. But like, are there particular problems that come to you a lot? Like, so you find that a lot of people are struggling with it?
I think probably the 2 biggest trends at the moment, which in fact the last probably 10 to 15 clients that I have had, one of the biggest trends that every single one of them struggled with was self-acceptance. Okay. And where they've spent so many years being told that they weren't allowed to be who they wanted to be, that they actually don't know who they are anymore. And they struggle to unpick themselves as an individual to work out and recognize how they actually want to live their life anymore. And I think the last 2 years of living through what we've lived through have made people want to prioritize that because life is too short. Yeah. And I think when I think back to my own journey, and maybe you similar, is we've all had those moments in our life where people have kind of brought us down a peg or two because we didn't fit into society's bubble of actually this is the way that you're meant to be and you can't be any different. And when that is drummed into you from a mindset perspective so much, you start to believe it.
Yeah.
You start to actually think that if I step outside this boundary and actually start to be a little bit of who I want to be, people are going to think I'm a weirdo. People are not going to accept me. I'm going to be cast out and no one's going to want to know. And I'm going to be the biggest word, the D word, and not that word, but disappointment.
I think the D word's Dave, so it's
okay, we'll go with Dave. But people's ability or lack of ability to accept themselves as individuals comes down to the fact that they are so worried about being a disappointment or being judged by other people around them that they aren't willing to embark on that embracing moment of just go and be who you want to be. No one cares if your hair's purple, if you've got a nose piercing, if you want to wear big pink flares. Like, if you can own yourself, and are we allowed to swear on here? Go and own your shit. Like, be who you want to be. And the moment that you turn on what I call and what I tell my clients as the don't give a shit attitude, everyone else around you is going to stop giving a shit.
Yeah. And you'll stop giving a shit about the ones that do, because it's this kind of comes up for us, but more rather than a self-acceptance, it's more of a self-esteem thing. And it's like, and
there's close lines there.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I refer to it as like being sort of like a bank balance, and you're not, someone coming along on the internet and being like, hi, you're worth it, and like is great, and it helps you up a little bit in that bank balance. But ultimately, there's a lot of kind of that self-talk you're going to have to do, because you've been doing that self-talk in the negative way since you were 7, so you're already you're already kind of very much in the red at this point. So like a couple of positive affirmations in the morning and stuff for 100%. One day, it's not gonna turn everything around.
It's a process. It's a journey. It's a process. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and it's all click of your fingers, it's going to be changed. It doesn't work like that. You've got to do the hard work. I did the hard work in my 20s, and I had to start again in my 30s, not as deep and not as much, but I really had to remind myself of everything that I did back then. Unfortunately, I got into a relationship where complete manipulation, complete negativity was brought down a peg or two after picking myself back up, and they used that vulnerability against me. And I started to re-question myself, and I was like, hang on a minute, who are you again? You have to make some changes. And I had to go back to basics and I had to start again. And now I'm here, I'm fine. But if you're not willing to do that hard work, and you're not willing to give yourself a chance and choose yourself over everyone else, then you're always going to stick at this. It's always going to be the same rut. And I think one of my biggest phrases I use with my clients is, if you always do what you've always done, you've always got what you've always been given.
Yeah.
And because no one else is going to change it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you obviously said that it's taken off like even beyond what your own expectations were. But have there been any challenges along the way from kind of setting out on your own away from the NHS side of things?
When you mentioned this in kind of discussion we'd had before, I think the only thing I can think of is that I live in an area in Hampshire where there are quite a few coaches. Right. From all manner of arenas. But you go back to that conversation we just had where people don't know what type of coach they need. And there are so many different coaches that actually, how do you work out what type of coach you need and whether they're relatable to you or whether the work that they're going to do with you is what you need. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the only factor for me, is that I work in a community full of coaches. However, I am the only identified mental health coach.
Right.
So we've got life coaches, we've got journal coaches, we've got counsellors, we've got rebel mindset coaches, mindset specifically, spirituality.
What's a rebel mindset coach?
Breaking boundaries, I think. Okay. Hence the word rebel.
I think I'll go and meet one of them soon.
She's incredible, I have to say. But yeah, so you go back to that conversation where actually, what type of coach do you need? Yeah. How do you know what you need? And what have you? Some people, majority of people come to me and they haven't even identified what is wrong, but they know that something's wrong. And it's not until you take a punt on getting a coach, and okay, privately that takes some investment.
Yep.
But you have to be ready. Like, you have to know that there's an issue, that you have awareness, but you're willing to break down those barriers to work out what it is. But I think from my own personal experience is trying to work out who that is with. You really do have to relate to them. You have to have that connection. You have to be willing to be open and honest and raw and cry and look like a snotty, blubbering mess, and know that you'll feel safe and that you're encouraged and that you're okay.
Yeah.
I, unfortunately, the first ever counsellor I had way back then, I didn't connect. I tried so hard, and actually they were impacting me being able to move forward. So I had to obviously stop and find somebody else. But I guess there's people out there in the arena who do try coaches and it just doesn't work. I have had 2 clients come to me in the past who unfortunately have been with a coach who is in the vicinity local to me, and they did more damage than good. And so I had to pick up the pieces. So it is really difficult when coaching is becoming more and more and more. We are seeing so many more coaches start up online. I get followed daily by random people who've got 9 followers and think they're a coach. And it's at times it can be quite comical, but I give everyone the benefit of the doubt, and no doubt, like I was back then, they're starting up and they've got to start somewhere. But when you start to receive emails from people who have invested in themselves with coaches that they thought were appropriate and now are more impacted and more damaged than they were before, and they've shared all of their information and experience, so they feel very ashamed and very hurt, it's really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you kind of overcome some of that? I'm not going to call it stigma because I don't want to put it in the same arena as mental health stigma, but some of that kind of those misconceptions about what a coach is. Because as I said, I have to kind of affirm what it means a lot of times. It's like, what on earth's a coach? But yeah, how do you kind of answer that question?
I think making sure that everything that I talk about and share comes from a guidance perspective. I don't, like we said at the start, I don't come with all the answers, but I come with a wealth of experience personally, having done this myself, but also professionally. I mean, my background in the NHS, I started in high security psychiatric prisons. I mean, I've worked with some seriously badass people and like dangerous situations of all number of types of trauma. And I mean, you can probably think of 4 or 5 things off the top of your head that these people have done, and it is that times 1,000.
Yeah.
When you come from that background, you have a huge amount of awareness that people need reassurance, and people need to not necessarily have the evidence in terms of qualification, but the evidence that from the people that you have worked with, they were encouraged and they did the work and they were happy with the way that you worked with them. And I think it's just about being open and honest in everything that you do share. I share my story quite a lot. Everything that I post or newsletters that go out monthly have some form of personal relevance so that I can share how I've used those tools or strategies, or how it may have impacted my life. When people talk to me about wanting support and the things that they feel they're struggling with, I try and find some relevant context in how I can support them because of my own personal experience. And I think it's just about not being shy. We spoke and said at the beginning that it's really important that we share the raw reality behind life. People hide behind a 1D version on social media, and it's not cool because people think that's truth, and it's not. And we have to be able and have the ability to just own ourselves and just be the authentic versions of ourselves, in the hope that it inspires someone and it encourages someone to realize that it's okay to be themselves too.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any particular sort of moments from your own personal journey that have gone on to kind of really impact the way that you coach people?
Oh, that's a good question. I think being listened to and time. So I think when you look for a coach or you're wanting some type of support, and if we look at the NHS kind of mental health capacity, you're given a kind of 40-minute appointment or half an hour or whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's not enough, because within the first 30 minutes, you've only scratched the surface for someone. So I'm very, I offer quite a lot of time to people. When a client signs up with me, an appointment, I block out an hour and a half, because it's really important that that person's not rushed.
Yeah.
I definitely, when accessing mental health services in my 20s, was very much right. There was a clock, a timer on the table, like counting down my 35 minutes. So I was like speaking as fast as I could and trying to remember all the things I wanted to say, because I was watching this timer go down. And I was like, oh, they're like, yeah, that's it. Now you can leave. Next person's outside. And there was no personability. There was nothing. Yeah. It was so kind of regimented, and you're only allowed this. So I make sure that I offer my clients kind of not me on a plate, but they have the ability to voice note me if they want to. We have open channels of communication. I want people to feel like they're having those moments between sessions where they really need to vent. Put it in a voice note, let me listen to it, and we'll catch up about it in your next session.
Yeah.
But they've had that mechanism where they've vented and it's not boiled over, and they've been able to kind of resolve the situation that they've been in or think about it more thoroughly. But also it hasn't impacted on me, because I have boundaries in place in terms of what that looks like with clients.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important. It was one of my biggest passions and important for me when I set up, was that people were given time and that they were listened to, and it was constructive, effective listening.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't given that.
I'm glad you mentioned the boundaries on that as well, because obviously it's an interesting thing that when you get into it yourself, you think, right, I know what I'm going to do better than what's been done for me, and then sooner or later you're like, oh, now I actually maybe understand why that was the case for certain things, and it's like I gave far too much access, and and to be fair, if I'm being super honest about it, that was as much, well, if not more on me than it was on individuals. Some individuals would ask a lot outside of sessions, but then if I said that, I wouldn't reply through these particular times, and then I actually go back on that and reply during that time, it's like, well, yeah, kind of like, and then it took me a while to kind of get my head around the idea that if someone, because it's that whole, when you first get into business for yourself, you're told reply to every single message, don't leave a person waiting, and all of that stuff. And I remember at the time that I'd never reply to someone if I was with another client, obviously, especially when I was doing the personal training stuff. I was physically there in the room with a person on my feet for hours on end. And I never even thought about it, because as far as my brain was concerned, I was giving that time to the person that was in front of me. But when I would be into those messages would be when I'm at home with my wife, when I'm playing with my kids.
The impact that has.
Exactly. And at the time, I was like, this is like 5 years ago or so now. At the time, I was like, oh, the people are taking my personal time. It's like, no, I was giving my personal time. If I'd have decided to allocate that, I'm going to reply to all of those messages at 7 a.m. tomorrow or whatever, I'm going to set that time aside. That's okay. So but it was about having those boundaries and ultimately communicating, that you will have.
And it's about the expectation you set. So boundaries ultimately linked to expectation.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to having your own business, as long as your boundaries are set and you have set that expectation of what you want from your client, let alone what the client gets from you, it is about not muddying the waters. I mean, you're always going to get those people who don't listen or don't respect the boundary, but actually they're not your people either. So I wouldn't necessarily want to work with a client just to work with a client if they didn't respect the boundaries that were in place and kind of weren't respecting those timeframes, or they didn't respond to or didn't communicate, which I've had experience of recently. Actually, it's kind of like a 3 strikes and you're out type thing. And you have to have those boundaries, because you can't just take on the world. We're humans. I don't allow my private work or my NHS work to encroach on my family and home life, because that's me. I need that. I need that to refill my cup. And the moment that you let that guard down for the one client, you set the expectation for them all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, boundaries are there to be upheld by both sides.
Exactly.
Oh, I had a question that's just popped out of my mind as we were talking about that. That's really... Oh, yeah, there we go. It's back. Yay, that doesn't normally come back that quick. So, I mean, when you said a phrase that I'm a very big fan of before, which was there's no one size fits all for mental health. But is there, like, especially when you're working on social media, do you find that there's been any particular messages that you've put out on social media that really just seem to connect with a lot of people?
Recently, I think it has been overwhelm or kind of being out of control.
Mm-hmm.
I use with my clients kind of this stacking mechanism. If you just keep piling on to the stack eventually is going to topple over and fall down and you'll hit burnout.
Mm-hmm.
We all know how precious time is, but we do have to give ourselves allocated time to work through those pressures and not keep stacking. Overwhelm, I think everyone's got the world on their plates at the moment in terms of kind of financial, children being at home, summer holidays. Unfortunately, people have experienced kind of job redundancy or changing career paths that may not have gone right. Family breakdowns, loss, grief. I just think there's a whole wealth of struggle out there. But the one element that people are kind of missing a trick with all of that is time. Mm-hmm. And your ability to allocate yourself protected time. We're not talking about days. We're not talking about weeks. We're talking about 5 to 10 minutes a day or 15 minutes every other day, just to have a check-in with yourself. What is there to do? I'm a massive organized OCD freak. I have lists for everything. I mean, we went through our study the other day and I think we found 25 unused notebooks. I'm a stationary, like I could open WH Smith, but I love a list. But if I didn't do that, I would create the stacking. Yeah. Because I spin so many plates, I have to be that kind of aware of what's going on around me. And one of my first ever points with a client after our initial assessment is they are given a time toolkit, and that is, if you want to gain the best and then gain the benefits of these sessions, I need you to create yourself some protected time. Mm-hmm. Because you won't be able to self-manage through these sessions if you don't have that time.
Yeah.
And that is one of the first toolkits I do with clients is, if you don't have it or you only have a small amount of it now, what does that look like? And can you add it into your structure or your routine on a kind of weekly basis and plan it in? Don't just think, oh, today I've got 5 minutes, that counts. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
that comes up for us a lot as well. To the point of it's like, we've got a little mantra, which is self first is not selfish. Because
selflessly selfish.
Yeah, exactly. Because ultimately, if we're running on fumes, we think we're doing it for noble reasons, but we're actually just giving everybody else the dregs of what we've got anyway. Mm-hmm. And by taking back a little bit of time for yourself, you lose a bit of quantity of what you give to others, but you gain back in the quality of what you give to others. So exactly. I used to actually call that came up with mine so much that I'd do a kind of like, let me guess, it makes you feel like this and this happens. And I used to call that my Blackpool Pleasure Beach psychic routine, because the person sat opposite me would think, it's only because I do it myself, I
think one of the funniest, well, maybe not funny, but I find it quite amusing, and sometimes I use it with my clients, is you're never going to reach your destination if you keep stopping to throw stones at dogs.
It's true. Why are you throwing stones at dogs, though? That's what I want to know.
But it's just something I saw years ago, and it's just something that just reminds me that you can't get to where you want to get to if you keep stopping and not doing anything about it, but fighting at the other things that are just nothing to do with you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like us taking part in every single fight that's there, and you end up with no energy for the fights that actually matter and the ones that you actually have an opportunity to impact in. It's huge. The one little saying that I've got that's rattling around in my head at the minute, and I'm probably I'll probably be making an anti-video to it at some point, which is the expression "old ways don't open new doors." And I totally honestly get where it comes from. It's like saying you need to shake things up, you need to do things differently. But I don't know if anyone's tried a door from today versus a door from 500 years years ago, they kind of open pretty much the same way. So I'm like, and that's like my brain's just taking that far too literally, isn't it? But there you go.
That goes back to all if you always do what you've always done, like nothing's going to change.
Yeah, but I suppose what I was only thinking about this one this morning as I was on the way to the gym, and I was like, right, okay, so I'm already going to try and negate that saying, but I need to have a reason. I need to have a positive reason for why I'm doing it, and the reason being is the fact that, okay, if you've always done what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got, but that doesn't mean you need to overhaul absolutely everything. So the old ways might not open new doors. It's like, well, actually pushing on a door might actually still work. Maybe that's not the thing you need to be focusing on. Maybe it's like, okay,
and sometimes it's not about closing the door.
Yeah.
Sometimes all doors need to be left ajar, because you never know what you might need to go back and readdress, or what learning you can take away once you've done some work and you've unpicked things a little bit more. You may need to take a step back and have a look at a different situation and work out, actually, I could have done that completely differently, and I could have learned X, Y, Z from that.
Yeah, definitely. Although one exception to that, if it's a door in a toxic relationship, get that thing closed, get that thing locked, get that thing blocked.
We'll allow those to be kind of burnt.
Shut that. Get it. Like, don't leave any space for anyone to get even a little toe in there. You know, it's like. No.
And if you are in a toxic relationship, just leave.
Well, yeah. There is support out there available if you do want to leave as well, because it's obviously we understand that it's not as simple as just leave, but yes, that is the advice. But there is support available for those things. So, do you have like any particular like goal or trajectory that you want to hit with with what you're doing? Is there an overarching mission to all of this?
I think within 5 years I will have left the NHS, and I will have embarked on a fully private career. And I think I've just started to work with schools and adolescents. So a couple of schools locally have done things what they call Pursuit Week, whereas there's a mental health focus to their week in school. And I work with a range of coaches locally, and we all go in for our own arenas, and we talk and teach kids from 9 to 15. I just want to keep doing what I'm doing, if I'm honest. My one goal was to open a community hub.
Right.
But that opened in April. So that came maybe 6 years earlier than planned. And that purely was because I was given an opportunity to do so. And we came out, well, we're not over COVID, but we came out of lockdowns and things where coaching had to be just virtual, and clients were wanting face-to-face. They want that protected time away from home, which for the majority was triggered.
Yeah.
And they want that environment where they can come away and actually do the hard work. And so I opened that in April. So my next goal really is just to keep doing what I'm doing, but do it more. But that will result in me kind of weakening or reducing my hours in the NHS over time.
Okay. And have you got some events coming up as well? I think I saw it on your story on Instagram. Yeah.
So I run a range of workshops, which are monthly, which are a free resource in our community. Last one was at the end of June, and then we had summer off, but they restart in September. And I'm working with a local mindset company and charity called Mindset Maintenance. And next week I'm running a workshop which has just sold out, which is the first sellout since they were born, on Overwhelm. So I'm really looking forward to supporting them. I have my finger in a lot of pies locally in terms of events and different networking events and offering free workshops and support. There's a local charity called Spark, which is all based around people being isolated through the pandemic and getting them back to kind of getting out and socializing. A lot of elderly have struggled in that sense. And obviously mental health is experienced by everyone, and there is no kind of age range. So I've been supporting them with kind of open conversation and allowing people to talk comfortably and safely. There's lots of bits and pieces going on.
Awesome. And on top of that, you have a podcast as well, right?
Yes, I do have a podcast.
Is it one or two podcasts, actually?
No, I have one.
I have one, okay.
I have one. So my podcast is called Plus Size versus Reality, and it was born from me creating a blog all those years ago, when it was my opportunity to vent when I was going through my dark time, and it was where I would share probably some of my rawest content, and they're still available to read. I was then contacted by a subscriber whose husband owns a studio, and they wanted to branch out at the time and do kind of some audio podcast work. It was when podcasts were becoming quite popular.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I hate my recorded voice. I don't even like my own voicemail. And then I thought, what the heck, let's just try it. I kind of went on a year of saying yes to everything, and it fell within that.
You weren't reading Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes at that point, were you?
No.
I might have done that at some point.
Yeah. Now look where it got you.
Yeah.
And yeah, so 4 seasons later, season 4 launched this July. And yeah, it's a podcast that is just explores every avenue. We've covered domestic violence, we've covered mental health, we've covered sex education, menopause, baby loss, IVF, LGBTQ matters, local community businesses, charity work. The arena is very vast. So yeah, if anyone's interested, go and have a listen. Sorry to plug my own podcast when you've got your own podcast, but
it's fine.
And that's where we met, was because my podcast was put into the capsule where you won. But
I didn't win the podcast one. Don't worry. I
thought you won the podcast one.
Don't worry, I didn't beat you.
Oh, you know what? Things like that for me. I've won a few. It is an award-winning podcast. I've won a few locally in Hampshire, but for me, I was just even amazed to be in the capsule with so many other incredible podcasts, ones who I've listened to and didn't even realize they were amongst those awards. So yeah.
I believe Proper Mental won it, which makes sense. They are they are definitely the biggest out of the ones of us that were in there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not the longest running though, because there
you go. Dave.
Then mine's gone through about 6 renames in the time I've had it up, but it's
well, next year mine will be rebranded, and the plan is to move it into the Beautiful Mind capsule. So we will be doing more of a mental health focused podcast, and put a lid on the kind of mixed topics. I just think it's an appropriate time to rebrand it towards Beautiful Minds now.
Yeah, sounds good. If you send me a link to I think I've got one anyway, because your podcast reshared the episode, but if you send me a link on Instagram after we finish the interview, I'll put it in chat so people can go and click straight through as well.
Oh, thank you.
But no, as I said at the very beginning of this, collaboration, not competition. I've got a very simple philosophy on this, that if someone comes from my podcast, hears you talk and goes, you know what, actually Hannah sits better with me than that Dave guy, then I'm cool. I've done them a favour. It's like, that's
and maybe there'll be some of mine that go, actually, I prefer Dave.
But if I help a person find someone that they like more than me, that doesn't, weirdly, despite having a massively fragile male ego from years and years and years of trauma, but like, despite now that I've unpicked all that and worked through all of that, I'm now like, look, if someone finds a creator that they prefer than me through me, then I've helped them on that part of the journey. It's like think of it like a relay race. We're not just running it on our own, So
exactly.
So I'm more than happy, and especially that you got some really interesting topics on there. We've not covered domestic violence yet. It's supposed to, it's going to be coming up soon. We did have sex education last week, and it was hilarious.
Yeah, we've got that coming up on the end of October.
Yeah, it was an extremely fun topic to get into. But yeah, it's been a great experience for me running a podcast, because it's like I just get to like sit and listen to interesting people and call it part of my job.
I've met so many people I'd have never ever come across before, or heard stories, or people's I just find people so interesting, and I think that's the psychologist part of me. Is I do find anything and everything so interesting about people, and there's other people who've got a wealth of knowledge in different fields as well, and it's just so important that everyone gets an opportunity to kind of be shared and communicate their life out there, because if one person listens to an episode and it helps them, my job is done.
Yeah absolutely.
That's all I care about.
So there's a slightly popular topic at the moment that's been coming up a lot for us, and I would like your thoughts on it. What are your thoughts on the concept of toxic positivity?
Oh, my question would be, is it positivity?
Is it positivity? My question would be, is it toxic? This could get interesting.
But it's 2 capsules, isn't it? I think the word toxic is only used because it is kind of over-egged, overindulged. People do it so much. It's like you're hit with it all the time. But is it the toxic part that's the problem, or is it actually positivity? Is the toxic positivity turning negative?
Yeah.
And I think that's where my stance comes from, is I do believe that you can share positivity, and it can be positive all the time. My question would be the intent of what you're sharing.
Yeah.
And would others find it as positive as you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because we have to have awareness of people's triggers, and we have to have awareness of how somebody else can perceive what you're sharing.
Yeah.
Because not everybody can relate to what you're sharing. One of the things I do struggle with on social media, and an element of this goes back to what we discussed about kind of fake coaches and working out who's the right coach for you. And you asked me about kind of things that I struggle with in my local community and setting up my podcast and things. It is definitely a more collaborative world in terms of coaches and us doing things like this and who we've worked with previous. But the ones who don't do that are the ones who aren't approachable, and the ones who don't share or don't communicate with you, or who aren't willing to kind of encourage you and praise you and like things. They're the ones you need to be careful of, because there's a reason why they're not doing that. And there's a reason why, but yet you look at what they're sharing and it's positive all the time.
Yeah.
What is your stance on toxic positivity then?
Ooh, it's kind of evolving at the minute. I mean, my stance. So we have a saying in our community which is appropriate vibes only, because we very much hated the concept of positive vibes only. Because if someone comes in and opens up about their grief, it's like saying, "Oh, be a positive." It's like it's no, only having space for positive. So my issue is only having space for positivity is toxic, in my opinion. Like if someone's not allowed to share the full range of what they are, what they are, then I think that's an issue. And so why we call it appropriate vibes only is because sadness is appropriate at a funeral. Anger is appropriate if someone cuts you up in traffic. Okay, yes. Is there a more peaceful way that you could approach it? Yeah, cool. Venting is sometimes, I often say it's not whether it's negative or it's positive, it's whether it's useful. So venting, if venting makes you feel worse, then it's a negative thing. If it makes you feel better, it's a positive thing. It's useful. So if you get what you want out of the thing, then it's useful. Why my thoughts on it are evolving is the fact that I'm an inherent people pleaser, which is something that I'm kind of like, I've done a lot of work on. I'm a lot better than I used to be, and I'm a little bit more ready to kind of contest things that I don't see as right than I used to be. Yeah, it's being a people pleaser is dead easy when you're one-on-one with people. But when you're in a group and everyone in the group wants different things, it's basically impossible. So you end up being this kind of like woolly, not really saying anything kind of person to try and keep the peace. And I had to address the fact that that's not what I came here for. It's like I'm just conflict averse due to various things that happened in my childhood. So when it comes to the positivity thing, where a lot of people in the self-development space, or in the mental health space more than the self-development space, kind of rally behind the idea of appropriate vibes only because it leaves space. But what tends to then happen is slowly but surely it becomes negative vibes only without anybody calling it out. And it's like, and the thing is, what you end up with a situation is that it's no longer appropriate vibes only because positivity is treated as if it's always toxic. So just like how if positivity is the only option you give, that is toxic. If positivity is rejected 100% of the time and classed as toxic, I think that's toxic negativity. And there's an expression, the greatest lie the devil ever taught was to make the world think he didn't exist. As far as I'm concerned, the greatest lie that negativity's ever taught is making people believe that all positivity is toxic. So now, if like now, if you try and help a person reframe some, I saw another person that I kind of know and like their work, like literally talk about this the other day and include pep talks in a list of things that are toxically positive. And I was like, you know, helping someone up, motivating someone, it's like telling them that they can only have that. So like, I'm like, here's a pep talk for you. Okay, I believe that your problems are real, but I actually believe even more in you and your ability to overcome them. Technically, that's a pep talk, but it gives space for the person's problems to be real, and it doesn't try and be overly positive. So I think it's the issue we've got now is that there is it's often kind of painted as all positivity is toxic, and I think that's a little bit of a scapegoat for people that aren't ready to change yet. And I'm very careful with my words on this one, because I know a lot of people, it's a little bit like never really intending to be ableist in your language, but making sure that you actually, like you said before, you don't know what a person's triggers are. You don't know if this positivity is going to be accessible for every single person. And I understand that. And the internet makes it a very, very hard place, because I used to do things in a room and you could almost always tell roughly, well, if you knew everyone that was in the room, you knew where their level was, so you knew how to pitch what you're saying. Whereas when you're saying something to the internet, you can't there's a big issue that if you even go too soft with what you do, there's a whole load of people that are over here that'll completely disregard what you're saying. If you go too hard with what you do, there's a whole group of people over there that'll disregard what you're saying. And if you go too moderate, everyone disagrees. Like everyone's like, well, that's a little bit lukewarm and a little bit pointless. So it's a hard thing, and that's why I like to discuss it with people and see where their takes are on it. You see, is because I think we're all still trying to define it, and we're all still trying to. I want my community to know that there is a space for their negativity and their negative emotions. I also want my community to know that there's a space for their positivity and their positive emotions. And if the person's not allowed to share their negativity, if that's toxic, well, if another person's not allowed to share their positivity, then that's toxic too. So it needs to be everything, it needs to be.
And that's why we're coaches, Dave.
What? Because we think about these things far too deeply.
No. Well, yes, that too. But because we're quite happy for there to be an open forum. We're quite happy for people to come as they are, to represent themselves where they are, and we meet them where they are at that moment. And people need more people like us who are encouraging of the fact that life is life. It's good and it's bad and it's ugly and it's shiny, and it's like every day is very different. But if there are people who work in our arena who just constantly make out that life is positive all the time, you're not actually giving a true representation of what life is for people.
Yep. So like you just said, then there's the good and there's the bad, right? Let's say the good is playing on a TV over there and the bad is playing on a TV over there. If I say spend more time looking at the good TV than looking at the bad TV, people might say that's toxically positive, right? But trust me, I spent a lot of time looking at the bad TV. Yeah. And you know what? That was toxically negative. Now a lot of people say that, well, let's look straight ahead and be realists. But most of the time, realism just edges towards negativity. And yeah, that's why I've recently realized in myself that in order to be that people pleaser / empathetic person that I value being, I let myself move more towards the side of negativity. And instead of giving equal space for both, which I think is balance, I began to give much more space for negativity. And I believe that a lot of the people I try and help do the exact same thing. And it's about it's about finding that balance. But I think in the pursuit of finding that balance, a lot of people end up focusing too much on negativity. And similar to when you said before about if a person throws a stone at every dog, it's like, which is like, well, at least it's a vivid analogy. It's going to stick in my brain. If a person stops and has every single fight that they have, by the time they get to the actual fight that they were on their way to, like, let's say, you're a boxer and on the way to the arena, you literally kind of go and fight crime along the way as a vigilante. Yeah. By the time you get to the arena, you're knackered and you lose the fight that you've gone there to fight. And I think with advocates, burnout's a huge problem for advocates. Burnout's a huge problem for anyone. If influencers, I said it again, didn't I? It's because you're trying to influence, because you're trying to fight every single fight.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is true, that if you spend too much time looking at the problems, by the time you get to the solution, you're too worn out to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So
also, if you spend too much time fighting, we've all got so many things we're fighting with and challenges in daily life. The last thing you need is to be fighting with yourself.
Yeah.
Stop the internalization, deal with everything else on your external body and people and scenarios and expectations and judgments. Just let it go.
Yeah. Absolutely. You said obviously telling people not give a shit. Have you read the book The Importance of Not Giving a Fuck?
Yes, it's love them.
Yeah,
both.
I've not read
1 and 2.
I've not read the second one yet, but yeah, it's the very much the brief of that book. If you want to don't save yourself the money, go and buy it if you can afford it. But if you want to save yourself some money, the brief of the book is choose the right things to give a fuck about.
Exactly. And the first volume of that book, at a time when I was reading it, I really needed to read it, and it really made me realize that I was not special.
I didn't get that from that. I just felt more special. I put my crown on and kept shining. Got a couple of questions for chat before we wrap up, if that's cool.
Yeah.
Number one, how would you define the difference between a coach, a therapist, and a counsellor?
A coach is to guide you in the right direction and advise you on strategies and tools to aid you in your direction of where you want to go. A counsellor and psychologist review and kind of make you relive the past, to make you rethink about what you could or should have done and not do it again. Cool. And I don't feel like that there is much guiding in counselling.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So yeah, I'm surprised. I clearly have not covered what I do for a living in front of my audience if they're asking that question, because I get asked that all the time. What, are you a therapist? No, I'm not a therapist. It's do you think that the NHS will catch up with the way mental health is changing and improve on the way they operate?
No.
That was quick and definite.
Definitely not.
Because?
1, the government. 2, money. 3, workforce.
Yeah.
And the growing population. There's always going to be an increase in demand, and we'll never catch up.
Yeah. I think that was it. That was the 2 questions. Cool. It's okay. I'm just new here. Oh, sorry. I thought that. Sorry, I got the questions wrong in the wrong order of who they came from, because I thought it was from the other person. I thought it was from someone who was. It was from someone who only started following last Friday. So that's so and which would make sense that I don't talk about it every single stream. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that I've not led you towards with the questions before we wrap this up?
No, it's been lovely talking to another coach. I don't get to do it very often on a kind of podcast streaming perspective, so it's nice to have those open conversations and learn stuff about each other, but also learn a kind of our teachings and our guidance and what we've done as experience. So it's always handy. Yeah,
it is. It's been awesome. Is there? I mean, we've mentioned the podcast. Is there anything else you want to plug? I have no problem with people plugging this stuff.
No, I would love it if any of you have kind of found this conversation helpful. Follow me on social media, on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll send Dave the link to the podcast.
One of my mods has already been off and found it. So plussizeversusreality.buzzsprout.com. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Amazing. My mods are wonderful people that just do all of my work for me.
I need one of those.
I've got like 10 because time zones, but
yeah, there you go.
Awesome. Well, all the best with the upcoming projects and the rebranding of the podcast and everything. And it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for putting some time aside for us today.
Oh no, you're very welcome. I feel really privileged to have been able to speak to you. So keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, that's literally all I know how to do.
Ditto.